In our final daily Devo of the week, we're going to look more closely at the final mark of a life on fire, as exhibited by a man named Elijah. Now, we've already talked about the first two marks, which were unquestioning obedience and absolute trust. Now, we're going to turn our attention to the mark of boundless faith. After Elijah said yes to God's call to deliver a message to King Ahab, and after Elijah said yes to God's call for him to trust him absolutely, God called Elijah to the home of a poor widow and her son. Despite the fact that she had no food, Elijah recalled how God had been faithful to him. And then he exercised faith that God would do it again. And sure enough, God miraculously provided food for the widow and her son, who were able to provide it for Elijah as well. In his message, Pastor Jim provided, I think, a helpful contrast between trust and faith. He said that trust comes from our experiences with someone, whereas faith comes from our belief in someone. So in other words, Elijah had already proven that he trusted God based on how God had already provided for him. But then he exercised faith that God's goodness would bring about a miracle in the widow's home. Jim put this in practical terms when he applied it to Elijah's story. He said, trust said, let's eat the last of what you have, whereas faith said, and the flour and oil will never run out. Isn't that the type of faith that you would love to have in God? Like a faith that expects miracles? If so, remember that Elijah's story doesn't start here, right? It started way back with saying yes to God's initial call to obedience. And then it was built on as he exercised absolute trust in God. Only after that did Elijah develop the type of faith that created fertile ground for miracles. Instead of doing what I think we like to do, which is trying to parachute ourselves onto the top of a mountain of faith, we would be wise to remember that a relationship with God, it's a journey that begins in the valley, in the everydayness of life, in simple yeses to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, then in bigger demonstrations of trust, and then finally in an intimate relationship with God that produces faith. Today is just one day on that journey. So what is God calling you to do today?